Hello and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show coming to you live from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConnachie, broadcasting throughout the United Kingdom and around the world on all our digital platforms, bringing you quality pro-UK comment and analysis every Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m. We'll be here on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, and also on TikTok. Please do tell us where you're viewing from and give us your good wishes, and we will give you a shout out. This evening we are got quite a few things to talk about, actually, and we're going to start by one of these things that, some Scottish nationalists, unfortunately, they like to think that, and I'll be talking about that flag in a moment, by the way, but some Scottish nationalists, they like to think that the Scots are somehow have got a much more live and let live attitude than the rest of the United Kingdom, but of course, most of us know that's not the case. We're very much of a muchness throughout the United Kingdom these days, and perhaps we always have been. But the SNP are so obvious in their sort of authoritarianism that it really does beg our belief. I mean, last year we were campaigning strongly against the so-called hate crime bill, which was essentially criminalising thought, and which has been passed, unfortunately, and which criminalises thought even around your own dinner table. And we were pointing out how that just went against the entire principles of the Enlightenment, and of course the Scottish Enlightenment, which was a big thing here in Scotland, which transformed the modern world. Free-thinking Scots are responsible for along with much of the rest of Britain, for the entire idea of freedom of speech, debate and inquiry. But all of that is being cut down now across the board. It just occurred to us, this is a good example. Huge backlash over SNP plan to claim Henry VIII crisis powers. Now, this was reported in the Times newspaper this week. And what's meant by that? Well, Henry VIII powers is the constitutional term that's given to a law which says that the cabinet, the executive, that is the people who are running the country, that they can make laws without recourse to Parliament. They can pass laws and they don't need to ask for Parliament's permission. Sometimes you can get a law which will have a Henry VIII clause in it, which means that in a certain circumstance, the executive, which is to say Nicola Sturgeon, John Swinney and the rest of their so-called cabinet, that they can actually enforce certain elements of that without having to even say that they're going to do it to Parliament. It says here, Henry VIII's powers were named after the proclamations by the Crown Act that empowered the King to make law without reference to what was then the English Parliament in 1539. So, there is a law called the Coronavirus Recovery and Reform Scotland Bill, and it has a Henry VIII clause in it, and it says, essentially, that the people in charge of the Scottish Parliament, the Cabinet, the Executive, will be able to pass certain legislation without taking it in front of Holyrood. And this was opened up to public consultation. What does the public think of this? 4,000 responses from organisations and individuals were received to this consultation by the Scottish Parliament's COVID Recovery Committee. And of those 4,000, 90% of them were against. 90% of them were against these Henry VIII powers being enforced in this bill. Now, you would imagine if we had a Scottish Parliament that was responsive to the concerns of the people, they would think to themselves, well, we opened it up to 4,000 people and 90% of the people actually got back to us and they don't like it. You would think they would therefore go back to the drawing table and they would come up with it again. But of course, we're talking here about the SNP. We're not talking about King Henry VIII. We're talking about King Henry Swinney, bad King John Henry Swinney, who responds in an offhand manner and dismisses these complaints. And he says that there was only so many of these complaints because, quote, the degree of public concern may have had something to do with the way some members of Parliament characterised the legislation. Close quote. Well, yes, it will have everything to do with the way some members of the Parliament characterised the legislation. They were entirely opposed to it because it's bad legislation. So no, that's just his offhand remark. They're going ahead with it even though 90% of the people disapproved of this element of the Coronavirus Recovery and Reform Scotland Bill. And what it means is, in the future, if there's any kind of emergency, the SNP will simply just be able to go down, the SNP cabinet will simply just be able to close down the schools, close down society, lock everybody down, and they don't even need to take it in front of the Holyrood Parliament for a point of view on the matter. So I just thought I'd put that out there straight away because this is what we're dealing with. Okay, this is what we're dealing with in modern Scotland. And it's particularly prescient just now because we do have, of course, the council elections coming up. And the council elections are on Thursday, the 5th of May. And they're open to basically everybody who's breathing and is 16 years old in Scotland, okay? So if you're 16 years old by the time the 5th of May rolls around, you will be able to vote, okay? It doesn't matter, you don't have to even be a British citizen anymore in Scotland after the useless British government devolved the franchise to the Holyrood Parliament, and Holyrood Parliament just goes, yes, human beings can vote, but let's make it 16 for now. So basically everybody can vote at council elections. I'm exaggerating to an extent. If you're in prison for murder, you can't vote. Not yet, anyway. But if you're just simply residing in the country, you can still actually vote, believe it or not. That never used to be the case. But after the useless Westminster government devolved the franchise, then the SNP have just like, who can we get possibly that we can pander to in order to try to get them to vote for us? So that means if you are a genuine British citizen and you're concerned about the Union, it really is your duty to vote on Thursday, the 5th of May. Now, everybody who's registered will have received a polling card through the post. If you've not received a polling card, then you may not be registered. And this may be because, for example, recently you've moved house and you haven't told the authorities, or it may be because you've just turned 16 and you haven't registered yourself to vote, or it may be that you've never voted before and you've never been on the electoral register. Well, I would really, really suggest that you do, and we'll put the link up there, the online link in which you can register to vote. There it is, gov.uk/register-to-vote. Okay, and you need to do that by Monday the 18th of April inclusive. That's if you're not registered to vote. If you are registered to vote and you've received your polling card, then everything's fine. You don't need to do it again. But if you're not registered to vote, please do go to that address, gov.uk/register-to-vote, and you should be able to find your electoral office, and you can do it online, or you can do it old school by turning up with a pencil at the council offices if you want, but that's by far the easiest way. And many people, of course, vote by post these days as well, and postal ballots are going out on the 14th, would you believe? Postal ballots are going out actually before the end date for registration. However, there will be a second delivery of postal ballots for people who register after the 18th of April. Now, on the day, the voting is called single transferable vote, and you get more than one vote. You get presented with your list of candidates and you rank them in order, with number 1 being your first choice. And you can go right down as many as you want, but you do not have to vote for them all. You do not have to vote for them all. So what we strongly suggest is, if you care for the Union, you do not vote for the SNP. You do not vote. You do not put any kind of number beside the Green Party. You do not put any kind of number between any sort of... You do not put any number beside the Alba Party. So you're not voting SNP, you're not voting Green, you're not voting Alba. And be very cautious of somebody who's standing as an individual, as an independent candidate, as John Smith, because you don't know John Smith from Adam. And Adam might be a Scottish nationalist. So don't vote for an independent candidate, somebody who's just standing there under their own name, unless you happen to know that person and to know that he or she is a good egg. So we would very highly caution against voting for anybody that you don't know who they are. Because very often these people, who, when they do get elected, they vote with the SNP. Now, you get some good unionists who are standing as independent candidates, standing on their own name, but unless you know who they are, you've got to be very cautious about voting for them. So simply put your numbers beside the pro-UK parties, whoever they may be in your area, as long as you don't vote for the SNP, Greens, Alba, or any independent candidate whom you do not know. So that's our advice, but definitely get registered and please do vote. Get out there, because remember, the SNP is relying upon your apathy. The SNP is relying upon your apathy. And there are vast areas of the central belt of Scotland which should not have the number of SNP candidates which they've got, but they've only got them because so many of our people, so many pro-UK people, don't bother to go and vote. So please, just this once, do make the effort to vote at the Scottish Council elections on Thursday, the 5th of May, and register. If you're not registered to vote, you can do it up until Monday, the 18th of April. The 2nd of April, just 4 days ago, was the 40th anniversary of the invasion of the Falklands. The Falklands taking its name from the man who landed on it in... It was John Strong, Captain John Strong, landed on the Falklands back in 1690 of all years. And he named them after Viscount Falkland, who was the treasurer of the Royal Navy at the time. And Viscount Falkland named himself after Falkland Palace, which is outside the village of Falkland in Fife, and Falkland means folkland. So that's how the Falklands, the British folklands down in the South Atlantic got their name. And that coat of arms there has a ram standing on a grassy knoll with the waves of the sea around it, and the ship which first spotted what were to become the Falklands, the ship called the Desire, which was captained by John Davis, who spotted the Falklands in 1592. Almost 100 years before they were named. And the motto says desire the right. Desire, obviously named after that ship. And what right should be desired? That is the question that's left standing. It's a pretty good strong phrase, desire the right. So what we're going to do over the next few weeks is we'll always recall to memory that the Falklands War, which lasted between, as I say, the invasion, which was on the 2nd of April, and the end of the conflict, which was on the 14th of June. Lasted for 74 days, and a lot of casualties. 648 Argentinian military personnel were killed, and 255 British, and 3 Falkland Islanders. Very serious war there back in 1982. Adam says that the SNP made an advert which was made to stoke hatred on the Tories. Could we watch and react to it to see the irony of the advert? Do you know, I haven't seen that advert. I heard of it. But the Tories responded, well, I don't know if they responded directly to that advert, but they put out a really good poster. And, you know, we've got to say, we're not party political. We don't support any particular party. But the Tory party, I think it was yesterday, they put out a really good poster on social media that got a lot of traction a couple of days ago. There it is there. Now, it's based upon the poster for a film called Trainspotting. And I'll just read it to you. It says, it's being ironic, of course. It says, choose chopping up school doors. That's what the SNP got up to. Remember that last month? Choose ferries with painted on windows that don't even float. Choose the Saudi Arabia of renewables. Choose blaming the Tories. Choose Humza. Choose an investment banker pretending to be a, quote, humble crofter. Choose ships built in Eastern Europe. Choose a car park tax. Choose named persons. Choose the hate crime bill. Remember, we were talking about that at the start of the programme. Choose the worst drug deaths in Europe. Choose decriminalising heroin. Choose millions wasted on BiFab, Ferguson Marine and more. Choose state secrecy. Choose division. Choose nationalism. Choose flags. Choose more flags. Well, we've got a soft spot for flags, really, so we'll just avoid those 5 words. Choose a hard border with your neighbours. Choose pensions paid for by taxpayers in a country you want to leave. That's a good one. Choose pensions paid for by taxpayers in a country you want to leave. That's the United Kingdom, of course. Choose a 12 billion deficit on day one. Choose a country stuck endlessly going over the same arguments we had in 2014. Choose another future. Choose life without the SNP. Choose life without the SNP. Well, we do have that option to choose it. And as we say, we're not asking or telling you to vote for any particular party, but we're telling you parties that please don't vote for. Don't vote for the SNP, the Greens or Alba or any independent candidate that you don't know is a good egg. Pauline says devolved government should only have limited powers, and it's time Westminster reeled the SNP in. That's right. It's a devolved parliament. It's not an independent parliament, so its powers are naturally limited. And too many Scottish nationalists and supporters seem to think that it's meant to be a parliament with all these full powers, and that somehow it's being held back by Westminster. But that's not the correct way to conceive it. The correct way to conceive it is as a branch, essentially, of the British Parliament. It's a creation of the British Parliament. All the devolved bodies are creations of the British Parliament. And we made this point in our magazine Do More Together when we wrote about understanding devolution. And we detailed how it's meant to work and what its point was and how it could potentially work if you understood that point, but how unfortunately it has ended up. Because what it is a devolved structure in a vertical relationship with its mother parliament. But the way it's ended up, because the way that the SNP have wanted to promote it, is that somehow we've now got equal structures all in competition with each other, almost to the point that you forget about the little British Parliament over here. But that's the way it's meant to work. as we say, vertical relationship with executive bodies, but it's turned into some kind of fake horizontal relationship with governments, which are presumed to be virtually equal to each other. That's not the way that it was ever meant to work, and it can't work within that context, because that context is not devolution. That context is slow separation. As we say here, devolution is British state power exercised by subsidiary arms of the British political body. Holyrood, Cardiff and Stormont are arms of the British political body, intimately connected and intended to be for the overall health and assistance of the body. Holyrood is properly understood as a British institution in Scotland which is exercising powers which have flown down from the central collective parliament, which itself represents every single person and all parts in our United Kingdom, to which we elect people from all over the United Kingdom to represent people from all over the United Kingdom in one collective body. That's the theory, at least. That's the theory, at least. And that's what we were told would happen. But once it was established, once the parliaments were established, there was precious little thought given into how to make that a reality. So we've tried to give some thought to how to make that a reality, and we published it in our magazine here, Do More Together. And you can find the link for that in the comments on our Twitter and also on Facebook and on YouTube. And it's only a £5, and this sort of thing's 40 pages, and it's 102 ways to keep the UK united. It's a great work. Buy 2 copies. It's only a £5. Buy 2 copies and send one to your MP or your MSP. It's time now for our On This Day in British History. On this day in British history, it was on the 6th of April in 1320, 702 years ago, that the Declaration of Arbroath, was signed and sealed. And what was the Declaration of Arbroath? Well, that was a document that was signed by the Scottish, or signed by certain members of the Scottish nobility at the time, and it was delivered to the Pope from Arbroath Abbey, and it was intended to persuade him of 3 things. It was intended to persuade him to firstly to recognise Scotland as a separate kingdom in and of itself, rather than as a feudal land controlled by King Edward II of England. And it spoke about Scotland being a separate kingdom. It didn't talk about independence or use any of those kind of words, because that wasn't the political thinking at the time. Back then, these places that we now call nations thought of themselves as kingdoms before they thought of themselves particularly as separate nations. So it was to get the Pope to recognise Scotland as a separate kingdom, with Robert the Bruce as the rightful king of the day, and to tell Edward II to leave Scotland alone. Okay, so it was an appeal to the Pope. And people may say, well, why is that important today? And, well, it's one of the key documents in the British constitutional tradition. And it could be said to have helped introduce what we call today democratic ideas into these islands, in the sense that the monarch was said to rule via the approval of the people. Quite a revolutionary idea. The monarch could only rule with the approval of the people. Now, the Declaration of Arbroath was not the first document in these islands to make that point. The Magna Carta in England had made essentially the same point 105 years earlier in 1215. But still, it was reiterating that point, which today is considered one of the key democratic principles of the Western world. And the Declaration of Arbroath differs from the Magna Carta in that the Declaration of Arbroath is shorter, but it's also edgier. Okay, it's also got more fighting words in it. And to be frank with you, that's the reason why it's gone through time it's gone through time to be known about, essentially, because of the edgy fighting words which it uses, and indeed which the people who wrote it had plagiarized themselves from a Roman historian. And we wrote about this, and I'm talking about the, so long as 100 of us remain alive, we will never submit, etc. That's plagiarized from a Roman historian called Sallust, and we'll put the link up. You can find the link there in the thread. But what are our lessons today from it? Well, thank goodness, the main lesson is that we've moved on. We've moved on. Or at least some of us have moved on. There was a march in Arbroath on Saturday, the 2nd. The All Under One Banner people were there. We weren't there because we're not... we knew it was only going to be a small march, and in any case we're not going to get involved in something like that, which is an important piece of Scottish history anyway. So we weren't there, but we did count them, as we always do. We have our spies in place worldwide who can count the Scottish nationalist marches, and we counted 793 of them, which is a pretty accurate count, I have to say. We used several bits of video footage and compared and contrasted, and there were no more than 793 marchers. We didn't count those on motorbikes. So there was not the 3,000 that they were lying about to the national mass media. And we did publicise that figures of 793 marching in Arbroath on Saturday the 2nd. Anyway, back to the lessons for us today. Firstly, the Declaration reminds us to be grateful that Scotland and England have indeed moved on and are no longer at war. And to be grateful to the Union for bringing us to that position. It reminds us how far we have come. It's the union of Scotland and England which has moved us beyond physical conflict. It reminds us that the Union has ensured we can be Scottish and British together, and where there is war, there is now peace, thanks to the regal and political unions through time. Unions which have created much positive social and cultural interaction. And talking of regal unions, of course, the present royal family are directly descended from Robert the Bruce. And I have a book here called Royal Scotland. And it's got a really good family tree here, where it details Robert the Bruce right down to Prince William and the direct line of descent from Robert the Bruce. And we've actually got that family tree in the article that we wrote. So today, the direct descendant of Robert the Bruce is in fact Her Majesty the Queen, whose 70th Jubilee, 70 years on the British throne this year we celebrate. And I was talking about cultural unions as well. The famous statue of Robert the Bruce at Bannockburn, that was sculpted by a famous English sculptor, Charles Pilkington Jackson, thankfully we've moved on, and the Union has brought us to social and cultural integration. And even back in those days, we were socially and culturally integrated to an extent, because I'll tell you an interesting point about the Arbroath Abbey. It was founded in 1178 by King William the Lion, the Scots King William the Lion, and he consecrated it with a dedication to the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was the late Thomas à Becket, and who had been murdered by followers of Henry II about 8 years earlier. Thomas à Becket was murdered in 1170, and William the Lion consecrated Arbroath Abbey to Thomas à Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury's memory. So there you go. That's an interesting Scottish, English, British thing going on right back then that has stayed with us right through time. Who knew that Arbroath Abbey was dedicated to the Archbishop of Canterbury? I didn't know that. A colleague of mine pointed that out to me a couple of years ago, which I thought was fascinating. Well, Rita's talking about how Robert the Bruce is a direct descendant of the Queen, or rather the Queen is a direct descendant of Robert the Bruce. And we will certainly try to get it out, because that brings us to the next point. What we're going to be doing is, because it's the 70th Platinum Jubilee of the Queen, we're going to produce a special Union Heart, which is our magazine, and we'll have that produced for the month of June. It'll be the summer issue, and it will be dedicated entirely to Scotland and the monarchy, celebrating the monarchy in Scotland and celebrating Her Majesty the Queen in Scotland. And it will just be probably just an 8 or 12 pager, but we'll produce it in such a volume that we'll be able to give it out for free at our street stalls. Because when we produce something that's a considerable magazine, such as a 20-pager or a 40-pager, such as this 20-page Union Heart, which is our history 10 years strong, when we produce that, we need to then sell these, because there's considerable expense involved. But if we get a big run of, say, an 8-page magazine or a 12-page magazine, we can usually give those away in bulk for free at our street stalls to everybody, to the scores and hundreds of people who come to our street stalls through the year. So that's what we're going to do. That's how we're going to get that out there. And we'll have an entire page, Rita, which will demonstrate, which will have that family tree on it, and which will demonstrate the direct descent of Her Majesty the Queen from Robert the Bruce. And that'll be one of the pages. And there'll be other pages, of course, which will be dealing with issues related to the monarchy and Scotland. And that's a good way to celebrate the Queen's 70th here in Scotland. So if you'd like to help us to do that, please do become a Union supporter, because we totally depend so much upon the people who are keeping us going month to month with their donations. Well, in this Busting Indy Myths, and this is Busting Indy Myths Part 11, we're going to look at the idea, and this is actually addressed to people in England. It's the idea that separation will make those whinging Scots go away, and we won't have to listen to all the whinging anymore. And why is that an Indy myth? Because it encourages an attitude which promotes separation. And we really have to bust this Indy myth, because separation will not make the Scots go away. Separation will only increase the divide. Separation will increase the Scots-English divide. It will not heal it. It will not make it go away. It will, in fact, make it worse. And how is this going to be? Well, think about it. It was one of my personal heroes, the Duke of Wellington, says politics is always about what's on the other side of the hill. You don't know, but you've got to imagine what's coming around the top of that hill, okay? And imagine if, God forbid, there were separation, okay? What's then going to happen to what's called the UK Parliament at the moment, you wouldn't actually have a rest of the UK. You wouldn't even have a remainder of the UK. You would have a remnant of the UK, which would very quickly collapse in on itself, because Northern Ireland is going to find itself in trouble, and then Wales is going to think, well, if Scotland and England can't hold it together, why should little old Wales bother with the effort? So very quickly, what's left of the so-called British Parliament in Westminster will rapidly, and by necessity really in many ways, turn into just an overwhelmingly English Parliament. And if it didn't do that, then there would be a huge demand for a separate English Parliament. And then you would have two parliaments in England. You would have an English Parliament, and then you would have what remained of the Westminster, formerly Union Parliament. And that would become an absolute shadow of itself, because the English Parliament would overwhelm it in power and authority. And so, remember, Scotland's still going to be here, and there's still going to be an awful lot going on in these islands, and so the SNP is just going to turn its attention from moaning about Westminster to moaning about the English Parliament, wherever that's based. And the idea that the SNP is going to go, oh, we've got independence now, what we'll do is we'll just sit back and we'll get on well with all these people in England, that's imagining that the SNP demand for separation is based on reason. That's imagining it's based on rationality. No, it's not. To a very large extent, the SNP demand for separation is based too often on simple scapegoating. You know, scapegoating. Oh, we messed that up. Who's to blame? Oh, it's these blooming English. They're to blame. If only they hadn't done this. If only they hadn't done that. And so that's what it's like just now. So imagine what it would be like under separation. Oh, we can't reach our potential because the English have done this, or the English Parliament has set this at too high a level, or this isn't fair, or whatever. So on and so forth. There's always going to be something that they'll complain about. So separation is not going to make the Scottish issue go away. You're going to keep hearing about it. And of course, the anti-English media, which is basically the London media, they're going to continue to love the Scottish moaners. They're going to continue to highlight them. They're still going to be shoving these people into your faces on television and radio all the time. So it's not like you can get away from it, I'm afraid to say. All we can really do is think, how is it best that we can all rub along here in our United Kingdom? How is it best that the union itself is not perfect, but we can best rub along together within a union? And most of the time, most of us get what we want. But outside of a union, we're just going to be like squabbling cats in a bag. And this is the thing that we're always pointing out, you know. Politics isn't perfect. There is no perfect answer to absolutely everything. The best that we can do is concentrate on, as we always say, on the big British picture. We have more in common than what divides us, and it makes sense for our political institutions to reflect that fact. And so long as you work from that presumption, then you're not really going to go too far wrong. But it's when you start thinking that there's too many things that divide us, that we can't possibly find agreement. Well, once you go down that route, then there's really no answer other than just perpetual conflict. So, the union relationship may not be perfect, but let's realise the dangers of removing us all, Scotland, England, Northern Ireland and Wales, from the big British pond, where we can all swim around together and we can rub along together, or we can swim around each other, but we can generally get on in the big British pond. And so politically, this means working constantly to promote the values of solidarity, not separation, the values of unity, not division, and to appreciate and teach about the benefits and the values of our common inheritance. That which we have inherited together over these hundreds and thousands of years here in our shared United Kingdom. Thus ends Busting Indy Myths, Part 11. And we'll bring all these together into a written work in the fullness of time, as James VI, who created that flag, liked to say, in the fullness of time. Oh, talking about TikTok this week, right? And thank you to all the people commenting on TikTok. But our TikTok's been flying this week. We put up a 2-minute video on TikTok of me talking about how Britain's got nothing to apologise for as far as the slavery matter goes. That was cut from last week's programme. And within 48 hours, it's got 12,000 views. 12,000 views on TikTok, which is just amazing. And thank you to our TikTok curator who really makes these videos fly. So that's brilliant. And if you are on TikTok, please do give us a follow on that, because we're really flying away on TikTok. Really successful. And talking about TikTok, Scots children are number 1 at TikTok. According to the Times, 1st of April, Scottish children were the UK's top TikTok users, research has found. This is what a bit I didn't understand though. It says, use of the video sharing app in Scotland by 3 to 17-year-olds. 3? What kind of parent is allowing their child to go on TikTok at age 3? If you're doing that, I would strongly advise that you don't, by the way. In fact, a lot of content on TikTok is not appropriate for anybody under the age of 16. And I don't think it's really meant for people much younger than that anyway. But the point there anyway is that lots of young people on TikTok, and we are directly appealing to them in our intelligent and thoughtful and educational and informative and valuable way. So please do help us, because we need to keep our TikTok curator concentrating on that. We have a good team here, and for that we do need your help. So please do drop a donation to us or become a union supporter if you can. And if you just want to flash in just a one-off donation, there we are, forceforgood.uk/donate to. That's just for one-off donations. If you like our plans going forward to do a special 70th Platinum Jubilee issue of Union Heart for giving away free at our street stalls over the summer, please do chip in a donation there. And of course, please do consider helping in whatever way you can, such as buying a copy of our wee book for the Union, which is a critical and important read. Very educational read. Very educational, a wee book for the Union. So please do make a date and tune in. And in the meantime, it just remains for me to say, God bless the United Kingdom and God save the Queen. See you next week.